Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Ed Wood Summit podcast. It's been a while. I'm Greg Javer, host of the podcast, and my friend Joe Blevins actually induced me to get back on the horse here a couple days ago. He said, "Hey, how about we get together and we talk about a certain film?" And that's exactly what we're going to talk about here shortly. But if do you want to give a quick intro, Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Blevins. I'm the founder of the Ed Wood Wednesdays series at the Dead to Rights blog, d2rights.blogspot.com, co-author of Dad Made Dirty Movies, The Erotic World of Stephen C. Apostolov, available wherever books are available. And I'm weirdly eager to talk about Yes, Sir, Mr. Bones. I had to talk about this movie with somebody, and Greg seemed the perfect candidate for this.
Thanks. I'm not sure what that means. Joking aside, we recognize this is a sensitive subject, so I want to say it right up front. If you're easily offended, if you're, this will offend everyone if you were to actually sit down and watch the movie. But we're going to talk about subject matter, of course, that the movie touches on that is considered in today's world, as it should be, universally offensive. So little forewarning there as we get into it. So we'll try to maintain, like I said, the sensitivity that this subject matter demands. So let's say, so Yes, Sir, Mr. Bones is the movie from 1951, and I guess very quick summary. It's a flashback to a minstrel show, an actual minstrel show on a Mississippi riverboat. After a young child stumbles or I don't know why he's there, he stumbles into a retirement home for old vaudevillians, including a lot of minstrel guys who portrayed minstrels. You notice, of course, when we get into the show, Joe, there's men in blackface, the minstrels.
Yes.
Also performing are genuine people who are actually black. They're not in blackface. So the interesting thing, though, at the retirement home, well, it's only the white guys there. Yeah.
Well, there's except for the piano player and the guy.
That's right.
And the guy washing the windows, unfortunately,
and the cook, the servant and the cook. This is why this movie's so offensive.
Yeah. That's the thing about this movie is that today people are going to just watch it and be appalled. They're going to sit there in, I would think, appalled silence for the entire running time. But when this movie was made in 1951, it was intended as just lighthearted, nostalgic entertainment, and it was putting the best possible spin on what I think the producer-director Ron Ormond thought of as, a declining era or a disappearing era that he wanted to capture on film. And in a way, as I've studied this film and studied the history of minstrelsy and the history of blackface, it's almost a boon to historians that this movie exists, because Ormond did manage to capture this vanishing aspect of show business. And in fact, clips from this movie occasionally do show up in documentaries about blackface when people are wanting to show the old stereotypes. Well, there happens to be a feature-length movie shot with real movie cameras and on real film and with normal movie editing of a blackface show. So, this serves as a documented record of this shameful era in show business. I don't think we've talked yet about why we're covering this on the Ed Wood Summit podcast.
We haven't. So if it's starting to ring a bell as we talk about it, you may recall a short sequence from Jailbait during the heist at the movie theater, the movie playing at the movie theater. We get about it's like 2.5 minute snippet from one scene out of Yes, Sir, Mr. Bones, the notoriously maybe the most notorious blackface comedian of all time, Cotton Watts, along with his wife Chick Watts. And then he also does the Alabama Bound dance number, and that's all we see of Yes, Sir, Mr. Bones. So it clocks in at a little under 54 minutes, but 50 plus minutes of it generally has not been seen very often. It's not an easy movie to find. It just did turn up, as Joe pointed out to me, on YouTube late last year, so you'll be able to find it now easily.
Yeah, I had only ever seen the part that was featured in Jailbait, and when I originally saw Jailbait, I didn't see this scene at all because the version that I was introduced to was the Rhino video version,
Right.
which takes the blackface scene entirely out and replaces it with footage of, I believe, was it Evelyn West?
Yeah.
So it replaces it with a burlesque footage, although it uses some of the audio weirdly from Yes Sir, Mr. Bones. Well, then I saw the DVD version of Jailbait, and I was shocked and stunned by this scene, the existence of this scene. Uh, Ed lifted this. Ed Wood lifted this entire sequence directly from Ron Ormond's film directly into his own, and uh, of all the footage in this movie that he could possibly have chosen, he chose the ugliest, harshest, nastiest scene in the movie, the scene that is the most appalling. And there's so much in this movie. There is a wide variety of entertainment in this movie. Not only do you have, of course, white performers in blackface, you have just regular white performers too. You have people like the Four Hobnobbers, and there's an Irish tenor who sings "I Dream of Jeannie with a Light Brown Hair," even though he changes floating like a vapor on the soft summer air to floating like a zeppelin, which Stephen Foster, I don't think would have known about zeppelins, but he changes it to zeppelin. And you get black performers, and you get actually some incredible and quite famous black performers in this movie. And they, of course, have to be in something like this in order to get on camera, I suppose. But Ed shows the blackface routine by a performer named Cotton Watts with his wife, Chick. And he chose the most stereotypical, most hateful scene, I think, in the entire movie. If there's a scene that's going to really offend people and really shock them, it's this one. There's a line in Chick's routine that I absolutely hate, and it makes me sick every time a little bit I hear it. So every time I watch Jailbait as an Ed Wood fan, there's this line in his routine. He has this routine with his wife where his wife plays a woman who's trying to convince his character to come to a zoo to take a picture with a lion, to have his picture taken with a lion. And then she explains that the lion can't hurt you, it has no teeth, and it was raised on milk, and there's all these, but he's very cowardly. She's white, by the way, in the routine. She plays a white lady. She's a white lady playing a white lady. He's a white man playing a black man in the routine. And she entices him to come to the zoo, and he says, with the other monkeys, and with the rest of the monkeys. And she says, with the rest of the monkeys. And the line I hate so much is he says, I'll bring my grandpa, which I always like. I hate that so much that he includes it. Now, some of the other blackface routines, of course, blackface, we have this visceral reaction to it, but some of the blackface routines are just sort of like Abbott and Costello type vaudeville comedy routines that just happen to be done by people in blackface. Cotton's routine is something else. Cotton's routine is really nasty, really negative. I should mention this book that people should really read. It's by a guy named Donald Bogle. And the title, I'm sorry, the title is going to offend people, but Donald Bogle is black. He wrote this book about the history of blacks in Hollywood, in show business. It's called Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks. And if you really want to know how black characters have been represented and treated in Hollywood over the years, check out that book. Well, of course, the title is all these different stereotype characters: the Tom, the Coon, the Mammy, the Buck. And we have several examples of that. And I would say that Cotton's character is the Coon. I'm sorry to have to use these terms, but that stereotype. Who is lazy, who is cowardly, who is greedy, who dresses in a ridiculous way. He wears like the ugliest suit in the whole movie. And it's like a foolish or tasteless person's idea of what a suit is. He wears this really garish and ugly suit. And he embodies all the worst stereotypes in this scene. And he's extreme even by the 1950s. Blackface wasn't completely gone. Minstrel shows weren't completely gone. They've been on the decline since the 1920s. But even by minstrel show standards, I would say that Cotton's act is really extreme.
Yeah.
It's
and that's in the context of what would have been considered at the time family-friendly entertainment, sadly.
right.
And again, the movie does, you mentioned the word nostalgia. The movie has a very
Yeah.
warm sort of nostalgic feel towards the past, and the riverboats sailing off into the distance, or not sailing off in the distance, but you get my point. There's some bit you mentioned too. There's a lot of musical numbers here, right? I didn't count them, but there's got to be 20 numbers. Not only musical numbers, but also comedic skits, dance. A number of dancing routines, as well as people singing. There's a couple big floor show numbers that are pretty impressively done. There's that scene that when they pull the riverboat up and they do their little teaser for the audience. That's a big production number.
The teaser is actually my favorite part of this entire movie. There's no blackface in it that I could see. Basically, the idea is that the riverboat pulls up next to the shore, and they put on sort of a free show for the people who have gathered to watch the riverboat. And that's supposed to entice people to come onto the ship and see the real show. And there's this great medley of songs, including, for some reason, Jingle Bells is like one of the songs that they play. I have no idea why they're playing Jingle Bells.
I wonder if they got the rights to all the songs they used. I tend to doubt it for a low budget film, because there's so many popular songs that just everybody will immediately recognize.
Well, there's Good Night Ladies and Dixie, of course, and Oh Susanna, that you hear several times during the movie, and Hail, Hail, the Gang's All Here. One thing, though, that made me intrigued when I watched this movie was to see the actual Black performers who are in Yes, Sir, Mr. Bones. And sometimes, Black performers did perform in the minstrel shows. And sometimes they would even have to wear the burnt cork makeup, because, it would be like a mask, basically. I've watched documentaries about minstrelsy and blackface, and the burnt cork that they would wear on their face has been described as sort of a mask. And it abstracts the person. You're saying like, oh, I'm not a real Black person. I'm this cartoon, or I'm this harmless entertainer once you put on this blackface. Well, they don't have to do it here. And there are a couple of great legends of Black show business that appear in Yes, Sir, Mr. Bones, including one making his movie debut, and that's the great Scatman Crothers. Scatman had been a jazz musician in the 1930s and the 1940s. And of course, we know him from The Shining and from all of his cartoon work. But he was in dozens of movies and television shows. And he's great in this movie, by the way. He's by this point.
A decent amount of screen time also.
Yes, he does a full-on sketch comedy routine. And then he does a song near the end, I think, called Memphis Bill. And he's obviously a very talented performer, and he does not have to wear the blackface in this. He's just performs as himself. And another performer that really captured my imagination, was one of the reasons why I want to talk about this movie, was a guy named Jester Hairston. Now, I recognize Jester from his role on the late 80s sitcom with Sherman Hemsley called Amen, which was about a Black church, and he was an elderly parishioner at the Black church, and he could always undercut Sherman Hemsley with a zinger. Well, Jester had a long and distinguished career in music. He was one of the world's foremost experts on spirituals and slave songs and folk songs. And he would travel all over the world, and he would travel to schools, and he was a goodwill ambassador from the US State Department. And his numbers in this are beautifully staged and very, very serious and very, very earnest. If you watch the movie, Jester is the guy who leads the song "Get on Board, There's Room for Many a More." But the singers perform several songs in this movie, and I believe they're the ones. I think we first see them when the showboat is pulling up to shore. You see the people waiting, and then there's people like watching from like a cabin or something, and uh, so Jester is one of the people singing there, and in fact, the movie ends with another beautiful song by Jester Hairston. If you wait to the very, very, very end of the movie, there's sort of like a post credits moment with Jester, and he's a vocal arranger, and the vocal arrangements on these songs are really, really gorgeous. And so it's, in a way, it's wonderful to see these talented performers like Jester Hairston and Scatman Crothers. And there's a piano player named Elliot Carpenter. I want to make sure I get his name correct. Yes. Who was a jazz musician and a classical pianist. He performed from the 1920s all the way to the 1970s. He played in vaudeville, but he toured internationally. He's in the movie Farewell, My Lovely with Robert Mitchum. He used to perform at parties for Hollywood celebrities. They would have this guy come over. He was even in the running for the role of Sam in Casablanca that eventually went to his old bandmate, Dooley Wilson. So Elliot had a long and distinguished career too.
There's a lot of interesting performers in the films, many who've been forgotten in time, but
well,
many who we still remember, and many who laid down hugely massive amount of credits, right? They were very prolific performers.
Practically everybody in this movie has decades of credits. Now, the most mysterious one to me was the man who really, the structure of this film is that a little boy wanders into a rest home for the old minstrel show performers, and then they start telling him about the old minstrel days. And I thought this was an effective technique in a way, because we're really eased into the blackface material. For the first 7 minutes of the movie, I don't think there's any blackface at all. When we first see these minstrel show performers, they're all white people looking normal, just like normal people. And we just see them dancing and playing, dancing and singing and etc. But then when the little boy comes in and he starts asking, what's a minstrel show and what's an interlocutor and blah, 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 then they say, you got to visualize it, boy, visualize it. And that's the first time we see a person in blackface. Basically, the way it works is that one of the white performers goes behind a post, and then when he emerges, now he's in blackface. And that happens about 7 minutes into the movie. So we've been eased into this world, because
gateway into the full flashback.
And then by 15 minutes into the movie, now
we're in this world of the past, right?
We're all in this world we're fully immersed in this world of the past. So
that's a nice cinematic moment, Joe. To highlight it real quick, Ron Ormond really made a lot of films, more so than I think a lot of people know about, and he was a talented filmmaker. There's a moment actually preceding that, the first time the young boy actually sees what's happening inside the old folks' home here, the retirement home, which the servant wipes like fog or something from the window, right?
Remember this moment here? Remember this?
Where that little kid's a little pain in the ass, right?
So he pushes his nose up to give himself a little pig nose. Now this actor who's playing the little boy, I said he was sort of analogous to the Bobby Driscoll character in Song of the South, but Bobby Driscoll had a real acting career. Well, this kid had a few credits as well. His name is Gary Jackson. He plays a character called Master Billy Crane, and his acting technique is just
what is he, maybe 7 or 8 years old?
7 or 8 years old.
And so he's fascinated by this. He wants to know all about the world of minstrelsy. It doesn't.
And by the end of the movie, he's convinced he wants to be a minstrel man. And of course, we should mention that there is a theme song that's played many times throughout this movie called "I Want to Be a Minstrel Man." It was written by
June Carr, who is the wife of Ron Ormond, the film's director. So let's go off on a quick tangent. Backtrack on that, Joe. So why did this footage let me ask the question this way. Did Ron Ormond ever have any sort of association with Ed Wood? In matter of fact, if you go to A Fuller Life, Dolores Fuller's autobiography, she talks there about how she was out to dinner at the Silver Slipper during Bela Lugosi's run at the Slipper. Her and Ed were on a date with Ron Ormond and his mistress, Mona McKinnon. So
Hmm.
Ed had written the part, Dr. Gregor, for Bela Lugosi, but then the run at the Slipper got extended for a couple more weeks because it was actually successful, Bela Lugosi's review. And Ed had to, Ormond, I think, was probably the facilitator with Halco, the production company. Somehow, some way, he had worked for Halco on a couple of occasions. I believe Outlaw Women was produced by Halco, which was a film directed by Ormond. So um, I think he thought, I can get my girlfriend into a movie. You cast her in this film, and I'll hook you up with somebody that can actually get the movie made. And he had to more or less immediately do it. So therefore, we get Herbert Rawlinson playing Dr. Gregor instead of Bela Lugosi because he had to make this quickly. So I think that's what I gather from A
Yeah.
Fuller Life and just the
Well,
general notions around that. And Ron Ormond crossed paths with certainly lots of people that Ed knew at the time and worked with.
well, Jailbait borrows from another one of Ron's films. It takes
It
its
does,
score. It takes its score from another one of Ron's films that I think has Dolores in it. Mace of Lost Women.
right?
That sort of clattering flamenco music that
Right.
you hear, that sort of free jazz meets flamenco score for Mace of Lost Women,
Yeah.
somehow, which Ron used some of that same music in one of his later movies called If Footmen Tire You, What Will Horses Do?
Right.
And if cult movie fans know Ron today, it is for the very extreme biblical films that he made late in his career, like If Footmen Tire You and The Grim Reaper and The Burning Hell and The Believer's Heaven. Um, so Ron had come from this world of making like low budget westerns with Lash LaRue, and then he went through sort of an entertainment era of films that were like singing and dancing, and of which this is one. And then he was just making kind of any sort of exploitation picture that might get an audience at a drive-in, and eventually he wound up making biblical movies. But he's a fascinating figure. I said that he didn't just have one movie career; he had like 3 or 4, kind of all back to back. He would sort of totally change up his style or his subject matter, and so you wouldn't predict from his early movies that he would eventually get to a minstrel show movie, and you wouldn't predict from his minstrel show movies that he was going to get to biblical movies. He wouldn't say like, oh yes, this is the logical next step to If Footmen Tire You, What Will Horses Do? The two films have seemingly nothing in common, but they do have something in common. They have this guy, and hopefully, as we were talking about before the podcast, the author Jimmy McDonough is supposedly working on a biography of Ron, and it should be out in who knows how many years, but it'll definitely be one worth reading because there's not been a book about this amazing career, and I am dying to hear how this film came about, because my guess is that Ron had worked with some of these minstrel show performers, and or had worked with some of these actors, and they would tell him like, oh, some of these minstrel show performers are still around. They're getting maybe a little bit on the older side. Now, one of the guys that we see the most often is this guy, Billy Green. He's the one who really talks to the little boy at the rest home. He was, by my math, he was like 58 years old in this movie. He looks like 88 years old. He looks like hell. Like out of their makeup, the minstrel show guys look super, super old. I was a little disappointed that we didn't see Cotton out of the makeup. I don't think we ever do see him out of the makeup. No. He's not one of the guys in the minstrel show, but he does get top billing. He and Chick get top billing in this thing, and Cotton was still getting bookings like into the 50s, maybe beyond that.
Actually, that's a good subject because doing some research for this, and Joe probably came across some of the same information that I did. A lot of a lot of sites will tell you that by this point, by the time this movie's made in 1951, the minstrel shows are pretty much gone into the past, and blackface performance generally had become, a thing of the past to some degree. Really, what this movie's about is about the riverboat minstrel show, like pre-Civil War, even I think
Right.
is what this era is supposed to. That the flashback's supposed to depict. You mentioned earlier, Joe, that there's a cabin right when the boat comes up on the shore.
Yes.
The cabin scene actually is a transitional scene from the old folks' home, retirement home
Hmm.
to the boat showing up. It gives us the bridge, the narrative
Yes.
bridge. The boat comes up on shore, and then the people go in to see the show, and that
Yeah.
occupies the largest section of the movie by far, the
Right.
whole entire midsection of the movie. But that scene is, I think, again, I take it as being, uh, you know, pre-Civil War. It's clearly meant to be a cabin on a plantation, and it's
Right.
offensive, as you can imagine, with
Yeah.
everyone. So they're literally singing while they're picking cotton. So
Right.
um, the other thing, just to go back one step further,
Sure.
in the um, in the scenes in the retirement home initially, yeah, the couple of servants, they call him Master Billy, the little punk kid,
Yes.
and that's supposed to be set in contemporary times. That's
Yes.
portrayed with offensive racial stereotypes.
Okay. There's something from these scenes that I did not figure out, and maybe you figured it out. They say that the little boy is a member of the League. And then he says, "What's the League?" And then they say, "Oh, just a bunch of people who don't know about us minstrel men." What was the League? I didn't get that.
I know what dialogue you're referring to, but I never really thought
I
beyond it
understood
as
about the
being like
League.
you're part of like the inside club type of
Yes,
thing.
I guess. I
Yeah,
think he means like that there's like, I think the kid might be a rich kid
yeah.
because he might be like going to a country club. Well, at this retirement home, there is a woman who is played by a real life blues jazz singer. I believe her name was Monette Moore, and she sings a song about "Get Out My Kitchen." But she sings it dressed like fully as a mammy. She sing I again, that's the term, you know. Um, she sings it fully dressed in sort of the Aunt Jemima outfit, basically, that we all know, the headscarf, the apron, and she's hitting a sort of another stereotype black character, like with a rolling pin and chasing him out of the kitchen. And this woman, Monette, she was, I believe, born in Texas, raised in Kansas City, but she had like a long career in jazz and blues. And here in the 1950s, she's also in the movie, the 1950s version of A Star Is Born. But here in this movie, she's playing basically an Aunt Jemima stereotype character, and she has to talk in this dialect, which I'm sure was not how she actually spoke in her day-to-day life. And I was thinking about how she has to sort of debase herself to be in this. But if you hear her sing this song, you can tell like she's got real talent. She's got like, she's really got the chops to sing this kind of music. But they're making her uh, perform in this rather humiliating style. Um, so these scenes are sort of a mixed blessing. You get this, you get these very, very talented musicians and singers and dancers. Let's say that this movie, yes, sir, Mr. Well, okay, there's something we should talk about the structure of a minstrel show, which I hadn't really seen fully realized until this movie. But you see pictures of old minstrel shows from the 1800s, and they are structured like this. A minstrel show is a very weirdly structured show from a theatrical standpoint. Basically, the entire cast is on stage for the whole show, and they're all sitting in chairs, and they're all posed as if they're taking a class picture. And sometimes people will get out of the chairs and come forward and to perform at the front of the stage, but everybody is there for the whole thing. And if you see, like, if you look at minstrel show pictures from the 1800s, they're all structured like this. The people on the end are called your end men. Those are your more raucous comics, and Cotton Watts is an end man in this. At the center, you have the interlocutor, or Mr. Interlocutor. He's the white man in the white suit, and he sits in a regal chair. He sits on a throne. And in fact, they have a throne at the retirement home. And the little boy asks, what's that? And they say, that's an interlocutor's chair. And they say, what's an interlocutor? Well, he's a man with a pleasing voice. Well, they're trying to sugarcoat this. But in the context of the minstrel show, it appears that the interlocutor, the white man, is the plantation owner. He is the master, and the slaves are all performing for his amusement. Now, in the Ed Wood movie, you don't actually, you might see him in the background, but you hear the voice for a few seconds of our interlocutor. And he's an actor named Archie Twitchell, I believe is the fellow's name. And Archie was in a ton of movies. Archie had a long and involved career. I think he was in, let me look this up here. Yeah, in Jailbait, we hear Archie Twitchell, but we don't actually see him. He's the one who says, that was a night in Maggie Murphy's home. And now to quiet people, which is a line I've always wondered about, to quiet people, Cotton Watson Chick. Well, in this, if you watch this movie, you get to see Maggie Murphy's home performed. It's performed by a white guy. I think it's Billy Green who comes out and he sings this song about everyone is welcome in Maggie Murphy's home. And it's the sort of, I think that the gimmick of the scene is that he starts singing very rapid fire, and otherwise he doesn't do much during the show. He kind of just sits there in the front row and he comes out and sings this song. So if you watch the movie Jailbait, you hear the interlocutor doing his introduction, but you don't actually see the interlocutor, because by the time Ed cuts to that footage, you're already seeing Cotton Watson Chick on stage. And I talked about this with Greg a little bit. There is one shot in Jailbait where I don't understand where it comes from. While the interlocutor is giving his introduction to Cotton Watts, in Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, what you're seeing is the interlocutor on stage in his white suit giving the introduction. In Jailbait, what you see is a sign saying like 5 big acts, minstrel days featuring Cotton Watson Chick. I have no idea where Ed got that sign, or I got the footage of that sign, because it does not look like a still image. It looks like a movie footage of that sign. So it must be taken from some other source. It's not from this movie. And there's way more than 5 acts in this. So don't know where Ed got that particular shot, but if you're a Ed Wood fan and you've seen Jailbait a bunch of times, you might have wondered about Maggie Murphy's home, like what that was. Well, if you watch Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, you'll hear the whole song. The thing about now to quiet people, Cotton Watson Chick is what the interlocutor says. And I thought that was maybe like undercutting, like playfully undercutting a Cotton, because he was like if you say that a comedian is going to come on and quiet people down, that means like, oh, he's going to bomb and the audience is going to be left quiet. Which brings up a point. Okay, all through this movie, Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, we're hearing laughter and applause. All pre-recorded, you think, or what do you think?
I thought so too. I don't think they were playing to a live audience at all. In fact, it's probably shot at some auditorium, though. It's a very large stage. I wondered, actually, did the riverboats really have a big floor shows to this extent?
Well, okay, that's one thing I also wondered was like how could all this be happening on a river? Well, I didn't really even think about minstrel shows taking place mainly on the riverboats, because they must have gone to places where rivers don't go. So I guess there were some riverboats minstrel shows, but the riverboat actually adds some theatricality to this movie. It adds some production value because you get to see the riverboat approaching. At the end of the movie, you see the riverboat going away, and the scrolling captions tell you about how the minstrel shows have gone down the river, and there's all these metaphors about the river and blah blah blah. And so yeah, I hadn't really thought of them as being central to a riverboat, because they had to tour all over the place.
Exactly. It's very specific to this movie. Yeah, the minstrel shows were very popular across, in fact, the entire country in the couple of decades running up to the Civil War. They really start to formulate in the 1830s, and it becomes what we see here fairly quickly. It develops into its own format, but it's a uniquely American form,
okay,
to a degree.
This is the thing we got to say about the minstrel shows as recorded in Yes Sir, Mr. Bones. Of course, today this is horribly offensive and racist and shocking, but it's also the birth of American entertainment. And we can say in maybe a larger sense that a lot of times the thread of American entertainment has been the development of Black entertainment, and white people imitating Black entertainment has really formed the basis of so much comedy and so much music and so much dance over the years. So as ashamed as we might be of a film like Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, this is really the genesis of American style entertainment right here. Yeah. Which is why I recommend that people watch the movie as shocked and disgusted and saddened and horrified as they might be by certain scenes, especially Cotton's scenes. Now, Cotton actually has, if you're as I am, strangely fascinated with Cotton as a performer, because he is a very dynamic performer. He is in this movie 3 times at least. He's the top billed person, so he comes on at least 3 times. His first is a routine about how to kiss a woman. And I thought, well, this routine isn't, I mean, he does it in the dialect, but there's not, I don't know that it's that offensive. And then at the end, Scatman Carruthers has a big sort of, as you call it, a floor show. It's a big finale type number called Memphis Bill. And it's incorporated into a larger courtroom type sketch. And Cotton comes on and he plays, I believe, the defense attorney. I believe he's supposed to be the defense attorney. But I'm not sure that this courtroom idea quite works, because first they describe it as like a criminal trial, that they're bringing in the criminals, but then they say that it's the reading of a will. So is this a will reading or is this a criminal trial? Why would there be a judge for this? Why is Archie Twitchell, our interlocutor, why is he dressed as a college professor, and Scatman Carruthers, who's the prosecutor, is dressed as a judge? I was like, Ron, you gotta rewrite this thing, man. You gotta put
on.
There's a lot going on, and the pieces don't all add up. So you get to see more of what Cotton does. In the last sketch, basically as the defense attorney, basically all he does is come out and stammer for like a minute, and then he sits back down. And of course it's a humiliating scene, but then Scatman Carruthers comes out and he just slays. Like he just sings a song with such like great confidence. So that's what I'm saying is, in this movie you have Black performers doing what they do best. You have white performers imitating them. You actually have some white performers who stay white and do their act just as themselves. There's a group called, I think, the Four Hobnobbers, who do a little medley. Four Hobnobbers, they come on. And I think the guy who sings Maggie Murphy's Home, I think he just sings that just as himself.
Yeah.
Among the comedy, among the comedy routines, there's a couple that I recognize from other movies. Had you seen the 28 divided by 7 is 13 routine? Had you seen that done anywhere
It
else?
was familiar to me. It was familiar. I couldn't place it, but I knew
Well,
I had seen similar routines, if not,
well,
fundamentally the same exact routine.
well, I had seen Abbott and Costello perform it in many times. I did a whole article about that routine. Ma and Pa Kettle did their version of it. So it's not a racial thing. That thing about dividing, doing math tricks basically on a chalkboard to show that 7 can go into 28 13 times is a routine that other comedians, non-blackface comedians, have done. And Scatman's comedy routine is one where he and his partner, who I think is named something like F.E. Miller, they're doing this back and forth where they are interrupting each other and finishing each other's sentences. And in fact, like, I thought you were living on, no, I moved away from there, but now I'm living near, oh, don't live there. And then I saw my doctor. Oh, what was that doctor's name? Oh, oh, don't go to him. He's no good. Well, you don't really get any information in this conversation because they're always interrupting each other at the ends of each other's sentences. Well, I had heard this same routine done by other Black comedians. And in fact, comedians who performed on the Black comedy circuit for Black audiences would do the same routine. And we're doing it well into the 1960s. So that's something that I don't think has its roots in minstrelsy. It just has its roots in Black comedy.
Right.
Because
by this point, you mentioned it earlier. Ron perhaps met some of these folks through in his travels because he himself started out in vaudeville, started out as a stage magician. June Carr, whom he married, she worked in vaudeville as well. So what happened as this type of minstrel show, as that started to fade over time, then blackface performers became part of the larger vaudeville troupes by and large.
Right.
Cotton, real quick, going back, his real name was Charles Watts, and he was again really popular in the southern quadrant of the country, in particular, all the way up. He passed in 1968. I found an ad where he was performing at the Peachtree Club, which is a big supper club right on Peachtree in Atlanta. He lived in Atlanta when he died. Prior to that, he played successfully around the where was he? He was in around the Florida Panhandle area, playing a couple of different clubs for well over a decade, and he was a popular performer. So what I mentioned earlier, just to finish the point, you will read a lot of things online and say this movie was already an anachronism. This type of thing was no longer out there. Joe and I both, I think, surfed and stumbled on the same site last night at the same moment, and I had shot him an email, and he goes, I got that in my notes as well. But there was a show, the Black and White Minstrel Show on the BBC, and it was an extremely popular show from 1958 all the way to 1978.
The year Ed Wood died, there was still a minstrel show airing on the BBC. And I implore you, if you're watching this podcast, find clips of the Black and White Minstrel Show from the BBC, and you'll be shocked. Now, this stuff had disappeared from American television, sort of. There is an episode of All in the Family, where Archie Bunker's, he belongs to some sort of like fraternal organization or men's, some kind of lodge, and they're performing in a blackface sketch. But at this point, it's very, very controversial. And of course, on All in the Family, of course, everybody argues about everything, and it's like, how can you possibly do this? Well, the gimmick of this episode is that this, I think, is the same night that Gloria is having her baby, having her baby. So Archie Bunker ends up in blackface at the hospital. But well, I was thinking that since the 1960s onward, the only people who have used this type of minstrel show imagery or these black stereotypes in this way are people who deliberately want to shock. It's now only from the 60s, 70s onward, it's basically used, well, obviously with the exception of the BBC show, that was very, very corny and sincere. most of the people who have used this kind of imagery since the 70s, let's say, have done it deliberately to shock, to jolt people, because in America it is sort of jolting. And I will take as an example the movie Coonskin, directed by Ralph Bakshi, and that film actually features Scatman Crothers. There's an album by Frank Zappa called Kingfish, named for the Kingfish on the Amos and Andy show. And I believe Jester Hairston, who's in this movie, was on the Amos and Andy show.
Yeah, and you mentioned Effie Miller, aka Emmett Miller, who performed on Broadway much earlier, had a really extensive filmography, but he also wrote for the Amos and Andy television show in the early 1950s, right around this time frame.
So, there's one of the characters on the Amos and Andy show, of course, on the radio, Amos and Andy and all the characters were played by white actors. But when it moved to television, black actors actually started playing these characters. But one of the main characters on the Amos and Andy show was a character called the Kingfish, who was a lawyer, and he would use a lot of polysyllabic words that he didn't seem to know the meanings of, and he had a lot of malapropisms, and he would misspeak, but he would do so in a very poetic kind of way. And Frank Zappa parodies this throughout his album called Kingfish. So there's a character that parodies all the black stereotypes. There's characters called mammy nuns in there. Obviously, Spike Lee, we have to bring up Spike Lee's film Bamboozled. If people have not seen Bamboozled, it got harsh reviews when it came out because people were like, well, it was too shocking for people, I think, to put the blackface in a movie. But Bamboozled is a movie that I think people need to see because it really makes you think about how demeaning images of Black people on television and in movies and in entertainment in general have not gone away. They just sort of changed. And Spike Lee was really trying to say with that film, like, no, things are not all better now. They're not fixed. We're just not doing literal blackface. So let's just put him in literal, let's just put literal blackface characters on the screen. So that's a flawed film, Bamboozled, but it's also a fascinating one that I really do recommend people watch.
That reminds me, Joe, many of the people in today's world who publicly donned blackface in the last few decades, if not longer, they got severely punished by the culture for it in a lot of cases. In some cases not. Yeah. But you can go down the list and you start really thinking about it. This era is not so far in the distant past as we may think it is at all.
Well, I think the thing I don't want people to do is watch this film, Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, and feel superior and say like, right, well, weren't they stupid and cruel and ignorant back then? And we're so much smarter and more enlightened and kinder than now. No, I just think that we're just less blatant about it than Yes Sir, Mr. Bones. Now, I don't know if we've talked yet about the title of this film, Yes Sir, Mr. Bones. Now, Mr. Bones is a standard character in the minstrel shows. There was, just how we had our interlocutor in the center, we had our end men, but we also had two musicians who had to be part of the minstrel troupe. We had Mr. Tambo, who played the tambourine, and we have Mr. Bones, who played the bones. Now, bones are like clackers. They were originally made from bones, but by the time of this movie, they're just made out of wood.
Brother the guy Bones plays him. Yeah. Oh, sorry, you were just going to say that, but he's great, right? He's real super talented. That's a really a lot of these routines, despite how offensive this is going to seem to a contemporary audience, everybody's going to agree upon that. But the performances, there's a lot of talented performers. The songs are catchy. June Carr's theme song for the she wrote Joe a theme shared song with me. He can't get it out of his head. Actually,
there's a theme song that Ron's wife June wrote for this thing. I want to be a minstrel man, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I was singing it at work this morning. I couldn't get it out of my head. Well, now Brother Bones, I want to talk about just for a second. He was a guy named Freeman Davis. He was also known as Whistling Sam. He's from Montgomery, Alabama. He was famous for his whistling and his bone playing. And the reason why he's known today is not because of the song that he plays in this movie, which is Listen to the Mockingbird aka the Three Stooges theme song. I know the Three Stooges didn't invent that song, but they co-opted it and made it part of their act. It's his version of Sweet Georgia Brown that was adopted as the theme song to as the theme song of the Harlem Globetrotters. You know, and if you hear their version of it, the Harlem Globetrotters theme, you hear the whistling and you hear the clacking, and that's Freeman Davis. That's Brother Bones, and he's a very talented musician. But it's interesting to think about how this performer who had to be on the minstrel show circuit, how thanks to Sweet Georgia Brown, he's still kind of with us in the culture today. His version of Sweet Georgia Brown is played in a lot of movies and TV shows. He had way more IMDb credits than I expected. I was like, oh, okay. But it was all the same song being used over and over again. It was just Sweet Georgia Brown, Sweet Georgia Brown, Sweet Georgia Brown. But there's the dancing in this movie. There's some great dancing. Some of the blackface performers, including Cotton, are actually pretty decent dancers. Some of the dancers I found actually performed on vaudeville as just white people. They just were just white dancers on vaudeville, but they blacked up for this movie. The two I want to talk about were Ned Haverly and Cotton Watts. Ned sings a song called "I'm Ragged But Right," and then he does a dance routine. And then Cotton, at the end of his lion tamer routine, he does a dance routine. And there's something strange about the dancing in this movie that I had not seen really before, because it's not the kind of dancing that I was used to, because it's almost like a gliding type of walk. You're walking almost in a way that seems to defy gravity. They're sort of, their dance style is very much based on like walking and just moving around the stage with style and grace and finesse. And I couldn't help but think about Michael Jackson's Moonwalk. And Michael Jackson is basically doing a variation just on walking, but in a way that seems to defy physics. He's walking and yet he's moving backwards. And I wondered if perhaps Michael Jackson, who famously performed this at the Motown anniversary special in the 80s, if he were influenced at all by these dancers from the past who had developed this sort of strange walking style of dancing.
In one case, we get that one gentleman does a sand dance, literally puts the sand down on the stage, and then he begins, sort of gliding across it, and it makes, of course, you can hear the sound of the sand, so that gives it another textural element to the routine.
Well, I'm in a band called the Glenview Concert Band, and we performed some songs at a concert from Mary Poppins. And one of the songs, which is a great dance movie, people don't think of it as a dance movie, but Mary Poppins has some amazing dancing in it. And when we got to Jolly Holiday, it's just a jolly holiday, da, da, da. Well, we had somebody, I don't know who it was, but who came out in front and sprinkled sand and did like the shuffling dance on the sand. So this sand dance must have crossed cultural boundaries, but it's great to see, because it reminded me of this thing where I would never have thought in a million years to do it, where Gene Kelly was dancing and he would throw paper down and he would split his legs apart, and in splitting his legs apart, he would tear the paper, and then the paper tearing sound made sort of a percussive noise, and as he was dancing, and I thought, oh, wow, I wouldn't have even thought in a million years to do that. And I wouldn't have thought of throwing sand down on the stage to make sort of a gritty, sandpapery sound as you're moving. So unfortunately, in the sand dance that we see in this movie, it's hard to ignore the fact that the guy doing it is, of course, wearing a blackface. And we should say that there's more to the costume than just blackface, is that you're also wearing like a headpiece, or what would you say? How would you describe it? A wig?
Oh, that, yeah. When they're not actually wearing the large top hats, right? Yeah, it's
Okay.
kind of like, yeah, it's some sort of wig. Yeah,
I guess it's sort of a wig. The fellow Ned who's performing the sand dance, his there seemed to be like a line kind of on his forehead. It didn't seem to be on quite right.
yeah,
But we should say that the blackface in this movie and in all, I guess there's more subtle versions of white actors playing black characters, like when Billy Crystal played Sammy Davis Jr. But the black makeup that we get in this is, I would describe it as grotesque.
right.
It's just burnt cork, but you make the person almost look non-human. You make them look sort of like a monster or something.
I think this is
Or
just it's sad to say, but if you were sitting in the audience, you'd be far enough away from the stage that it highlights the lips to make them appear larger.
I hadn't thought about that. Maybe one of the reasons why this movie looks so startling is that blackface maybe wasn't meant to be seen up close like
Right. Yeah,
this.
it's got crisp black and white photography. Yeah, and it's
Well,
really good print of the film, and it's well scanned. So yeah, you're gonna see this up close in a way that definitely you wouldn't have in a performance venue.
so maybe, I mean, there's not any context in which blackface is appropriate, but it's like especially grotesque here because, again, as you say, we're
Yeah.
seeing it in very high quality film. And in fact, one of the things that makes this scene really stand out in Jailbait is that it's much sharper focus
Yeah.
than it's like much more even lighting and sharper focus, and like suddenly it looks like the budget of Jailbait just went up by quite a bit here.
You mentioned burnt cork. I'm glad you mentioned it again because I wanted to recall this is 4 or 5 years ago, and it was at a time. And Joe remembers this time frame. We had been exchanging some things, and I had at one point one of many Ed Wood Wednesdays articles that sat in the unfinished pile. I'd done some considerable amount of research into Cotton Watts in particular,
Right.
and somehow, and I don't remember. Won't name the gentleman's name without having, you know, uh, gotten his permission, but I was talking to somebody apropos of Cotton Watts. Actually, it was apropos of something else, and this came up. This is how this always happens with me when I'm researching Ed Wood. So, it seems to. So he mentioned when he was a teenager, he was friends with the gentleman who ran the Peachtree Supper Club. And so on occasions, he and his friend, when they were teenagers, this is circa mid 60s, would go and see performances at the supper club. And so one day, backstage, Cotton Watts actually was applying the burnt cork, and this gentleman got to sit down as a teenager, and this would have been near the end of Cotton Watts's life, and he got to see him literally apply the burnt cork. He carried it around in a fishing tackle box, and they were actual fishing tackle corks that he used.
It's an unbelievable way to make a living. It's unbelievable that you would have to do this. The thing I think we should say about Cotton is that he is not an untalented guy.
Yeah,
Uh, he has great comic timing. He has great control of his body, great control of his face. Um, Chick, it doesn't really add much to the act other than just to be a straight woman.
right.
She kind of reminds me a little bit of Vivian Vance. She's a little bit like Ethel Mertz, not in Vivian Vance's class as an actress or comedian, but she's sort of like that personality wise. But so many of the performers, like Slim Williams, is in this film, and he does the stump speech, and he is the one who reminded me so much of the Kingfish from um, Amos and Andy, because he's using all of these words like the Declaration of Indigestion and stuff like that instead of independence. Um, and I was thinking that all of these performers, these blackface performers, these minstrel show performers, they have the chops to have done other things. They could have just been, they could have just been Abbott and Costello. They could have just done some of these routines as themselves. And I think some of the stuff in the stump speech scene, for instance, is funny enough that it didn't need this
Right.
gimmickry of the blackface. And I'm also thinking now of a British comedian named Bernard Manning. Now, Bernard didn't perform in blackface, but he did perform very, very offensive racial material. And one of the people in a documentary about Bernard said, it's such a shame. He has such great timing. He has such great rapport with an audience. He has such a great way of telling a joke, such a great way of telling a story, that he could have used that talent, those skills, to make fun of racial stereotypes. He could have used it to undermine racial stereotypes, and he could have done it beautifully. Instead, he actually used it, in furthering the stereotypes. Because Bernard is not an untalented guy, was not an untalented guy either. Bernard actually had great, again, comic delivery, great comic timing. So Cotton was not a hack. Cotton was, in his own weird way, talented. It was just that he directed, I think, his talent in the wrong direction with this blackface material, and he kept it going. He must have been like I don't know if he ever billed himself as the last of the minstrels or anything, but
I don't know.
He would have been.
Well might have, right?
He might have been. He might have been the last of them. And part of this movie, this movie has almost a funereal quality to it. It's almost like a send-off for blackface, which is why it's so ironic at the end that the little white boy who's been sitting through all of this, he says to his mom very proudly, "I want to be a minstrel man." Well, kid, have you not been paying attention for this entire movie? The whole point of it was that this is a lifestyle that's going away. And those minstrel jobs are not going to be out there when you grow up in the 60s and 70s, kid. And when we say that this lifestyle is going away, that had to make me think of Gone with the Wind. I mean, which has a Mammy character of its own, who I believe is actually just called Mammy. Mm-hmm. And of course, the knock against Gone with the Wind is that it's romanticizing the old ways. It's romanticizing the days of slavery. It's romanticizing the Old South. It's saying that this lifestyle, this whole world is gone with the wind. Well, in this movie, it's not gone with the wind. It's, I think, sail down the river. But I mean, it's not far from Gone with the Wind to Sail Down the River. I mean, it's the same basic idea. It's this nostalgia and showing that Black people were part of it, that they are as fond of this, old-timey South as anybody. Like, well, no, I don't think they are as fond of this as the white people are. So this idea that I think that Black people were, the songwriter whose material is used most often in this movie has got to be Stephen Foster. Half of Stephen Foster's songs are in this goddamn movie. And that's always the knock against Stephen Foster, is that he's portraying this false version of the South where, the contented slaves, and they love the master, and they were as sorry to see it go as anyone. They were sorry to see it go, gone with the wind or down the river, or whatever metaphor that you want to use for this world disappearing. And so that's why, if you watch this movie, then watch 12 Years a Slave right afterwards or something. It's just
super quick, Joe. I need to take a pause. I gotta use the little boys' room. I'll be back, folks, momentarily. In fact, I'll pause it so you won't miss a beat. All right, we're back.
And through the magic of movies, I'm now in a completely different outfit because we're going through just a beastly heat wave here in the Midwest. I'm sure many places across America, it's been very hot and humid. So we should be grateful for things like air conditioning, which they didn't have in the minstrel days. I imagine performing on those showboats, it got, I would have to say, incredibly, incredibly hot.
They wearing one of those they look like they're very heavy suits. They're very heavy fabric, and the big top hat.
And if you look at pictures of actual minstrel shows, of course, they're not photographs from the early days. They're like drawings and posters and things like that. The outfits that we see in Yes Sir, Mr. Bones are not far-fetched. That is, that is kind of what they would be wearing. Um,
Of course, reminds me that, and a lot of people probably won't appreciate me reminding anybody of this, especially folks like me who grew up on Dr. Seuss and adored Dr. Seuss, to realize that
mhm.
the Cat in the Hat actually is his costume is a bit rooted in minstrelsy,
Sure.
and as I'm sure you all know, a number of Theodore Geisel's books have been pulled
Pulled
from
off
the
the
market in
shelves.
recent years
Yeah.
because of related
I
stereotyping and offensive imagery.
I believe that did Ted Geisel recant on some of that? I believe on one of these on one of the books that was pulled entirely, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, I believe he
Yeah,
made attempts to he had acknowledged the problems with the books and had attempted over the years to tone it down. But I think it was still not enough, and I think it's now been just pulled
yeah,
from
it
existence
is.
entirely.
Yeah, the publisher
So
themselves, or actually, I think the family pulled it.
the family pulled it.
Hmm.
So um, yeah, unfortunately, there's some. Ted did some cartoons too that are pretty harsh. Um, so the thing is, this material that we're covering in this film, it's very shocking to us now. It was completely like normal to audiences of the past, and I don't think that this film. Supposedly, I didn't look at any of the contemporary reviews, the ones reviews of Yes Sir, Mr. Bones from when it came out. But supposedly at the time, it got relatively positive notices at the time, because I think how people would have interpreted it is just here's just an hour of singing, dancing, and comedy. Um,
I,
now,
I did read some contemporary reviews, and they largely, arrive at the more or less the same conclusion that we have. We have a
okay,
historical document here that, has some value. Without it, we wouldn't have a picture of this to this extent. Uh, but that it is obviously patently offensive. That's
yeah,
what more contemporary reviews. I did actually go through the comments on the YouTube page where the film is posted because I was
sure.
curious to see. And yeah, quite active dialogue there, as you would expect,
Well,
where some people praising the film were then subsequently, clubbed over the head by some other people who
well,
couldn't understand how they could praise it in any way, shape, or form. But so I think we've done a good job being very
yes, I think we
even-handed.
have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like to
I mean,
think.
I think I don't want to say I don't want to go overboard in necessarily praising this movie. Even as an artistic achievement, it is a modest one. It is there's virtually no plot to it. It is basically just a filmed concert. Basically, it's basically a filmed play or concert. It's um, there's no great technical feats here, but I think this is a film that Ed Wood fans should definitely check out. Um, Fans of Ron Ormond should check out because this was a chapter in his career. And people who are interested in the history of racism in Hollywood and racial portrayals in Hollywood. And if you ever see these stories about, oh, why are they freaking out about this movie or this TV show or something? It seems harmless to me. Well, go back and watch Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, and you can see where it's all in good fun. It's all just for entertainment. You can see where all that mentality leads. And this is such a cheerful, happy-faced, smiling movie all the time, other than the music of Jester Hairston, which is oftentimes there's like a mournful quality to some of Jester's songs in this movie, including the one at the very, very end. Um, the song at the very end of the movie, like basically at the end of the credits, is "In the Evening" by the Moonlight, which is a Stephen Foster song. But
The transitional song, like I said, when we transition from the retirement home
yeah,
and we get to the onto the boat, there's that transitional scene at the cabin. And when that scene
mm,
first starts, the song that the slaves are singing is a spiritual
So,
deep
Deep
river.
River.
Yeah,
You know,
and it's very
and I'm
somber, very very somber. Yeah, if
and
you know that song, you know that.
I'm sorry to say that the first time I ever heard Deep River was in National Lampoon's Vacation, where it is sung by Chevy Chase as they are crossing the Mississippi River with his family, and he sings it in sort of a uh, exaggerated Negro accent. At the end of the movie, when you hear at the very end of the film, when you hear "In the Evening by the Moonlight," it's actually kind of a sad song because it's like we work all day and only in the evening by the moonlight do we get just a little bit of time to enjoy ourselves and play music and things like that. And a version that I heard of the song was by Nina Simone, and Nina performs it at the piano, and it's really, really beautiful. So I would definitely recommend checking out Nina Simone's version of that song. Um, so in those moments, like when they sing Deep River, you see sort of maybe that there is another side to this story. There is a more somber undercurrent to this. Um, and you see how performers like Jester Hairston and Scatman Crothers and, Elliot Carpenter, how they had to play along to get into movies. And it's a shame, but we shouldn't hide from this stuff. That's why I want people to see this movie. That's why I'm glad it's on YouTube. That's why I'm glad it's in the documentaries. Uh, why clips from this movie keep ending up in the documentaries. Um, I don't love the way that Ed uses it. I think Ed uses it without commentary. I think Ed uses it. I think he's just using it like unironically, just like, hey, here's a great scene and watch this for a few minutes. Um, so I can understand. Well, what do you think about the regular version of Jailbait or the director's cut? Do you think that this scene should be in there, or do you think the Evelyn West treasure chest stuff should
Well,
be in there?
we can presume that Rhino, Wade Williams slash Rhino, when they released the director's cut, I believe on VHS in like 1994, something like that,
Right.
with the Evelyn West scene, that it's kind of unclear in Wade Williams's language on the back. It makes it, some lost spicy footage. I'm
Right.
paraphrasing,
Something like
but
that.
but there this had actually created a little bit of misunderstanding. Depending on what you read, you'll see that people make surmises and they say, well, some markets. The film would have
Right.
played with the Evelyn West burlesque footage,
Which,
where they could have played it with a little bit more sexy, spiced up footage, or they would have played the Yes Sir Mr. Bones scene, the Cotton Watts scene for maybe markets down south. The fact of the matter is, the director's cut is not the director's cut.
no,
Right?
not at all.
It's a short, it's a burlesque short that's been tacked on. Of Evelyn Treasure Chest West, who's quite wonderful. So for me, the authentic version is what I have to go with.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think it's it's sad that the scene is in here. And I wish of almost any scene. Gosh, I wish he'd even chosen the 7 divided by, no, 28 divided by 7 is
right.
13. I wish he'd just chosen something like that, or the Scatman Crothers scene or anything. But uh, I mean, at least its placement in Jailbait means you have to look at this. You have to pay attention to this. So nowadays, the place where Yes Sir Mr. Bones is likely to be seen in any place is documentaries about minstrelsy and blackface. Again, like I said, this is a weirdly perfect document of this thing, like that that Ron had the foresight. I don't know that he had foresight. He maybe didn't. But now in retrospect, it seems like, oh, he had the foresight to preserve this, this era
Right.
of entertainment as was dying. But in a weird way, I'm glad he did, because as ugly as this is, I mean, it's there. You have to look at. Well, I saw this story about the history of blackface on like CBS this morning, or like Jane Pauley is posting now, and the anchor, well, the reporter that was doing the story was, having these blackface scenes screened for him. And he says, oh, I don't want to look at it. I want to turn my head. I want to look away. Well, and I was like, well, don't look away. Look at it. I mean, people should see, Judy Garland in blackface. They should see Bugs Bunny and, uh, uh, even Fred Astaire in blackface. They
And
should
the
see
list
it.
goes on, even
And the
right
list
into
goes.
the 21st century. The
So,
list goes on. Yeah.
so yeah, don't turn away. Look at this thing, and I would say it's less than an hour. And I think people should actually see the full thing.
Right.
So I'm glad that I saw the full thing, if just to see what a night in Maggie Murphy's home was. I've been hearing about it from Ed's movie. You hear him describe it. By the way, the guy that I was talking about earlier was our interlocutor is Archie Twitchell. He'd worked with Ron Ormond before, but he was in all kinds of movies from the 30s to the 50s. He's in Sunset Boulevard. He's in Fort Apache. He's in Out of the Past. He's in Alfred Hitchcock's Saboteur. This is a real dude. And I'm not sure why he's here. I mean, he's there to be the interlocutor, which is a real thing from minstrel shows. I don't know why it has to be this guy particularly.
There's another performer we neglected to mention who I looked at the IMDb page after I watched the film and then noticed his name, so I didn't go back to connect the dot yet. So I'll challenge you all to go find Phil Arnold, figure out which character he is among the performers, because he's in the credits. So you're probably thinking, who's Phil Arnold? So he started out in vaudeville, burlesque comic, etc. And he in total had almost 200 screen credits on his IMDb page over a very lengthy career, a lot of television, a lot of, to echo the same point Joe just made about the other performer. He's in a lot of mainstream films, small roles in a lot of very big Hollywood films. He was in 14 Three Stooges shorts early on. And here's the little wrinkle. And I'll give a shout out to CapriShowWorld.com. Earlier this year published an article and connected the dot. And subsequently, she was interviewed at the Rialto Report, and she validates that entirely. So it's Maria Arnold, just Phil Arnold's daughter. So Maria Arnold, original name, his name was Phil Aronoff, changed it to Arnold. But Maria Arnold, I'm sure you'll recognize as playing Tanya in Necromania and many other vintage sex films, which is a site to recommend if you like that sort of thing. CapriShowWorld.com.
Wow, a connection to Tanya from Necromania. And
there's also Ray Mercer did the special effects for Yes Sir, Mr. Bones. So Ray Mercer has almost 300 credits on his IMDb page for special effects. And he, in fact, is credited as such on Jailbait as well as The Sinister Urge. So another little Ed connection there.
There's one guy in the credits that I noticed was a guy named Walter Green. He did the music for this movie. He did so many cartoons later in his career. He did a bunch of like Pink Panther cartoons. And it's weird to think that the guy who's doing music for Pink Panther cartoons at one point in his life, it's kind of weird that this was like, I don't know how long this took to film, maybe a couple of days, that this was a weird couple of days in everybody's life, that they were making Yes Sir, Mr. Bones. But you got to start somewhere. You got to do something. And well, some of these people are on their way up in show business, and some are kind of on their way out. So you're seeing, rising people and falling people, and they all came together for this in this one very, very strange movie. Now, did Ron ever do any more like minstrel show movies? Do you know?
No.
Did he do it? No,
he did again. Yeah, he did this sort of variety show format in other films, like either as producer and or director, including films like Kentucky Jubilee, Square Dance Jubilee, Varieties on Parade. He did a little chunk of films harkening back to his nostalgia for vaudeville, but this is the only one that is themed around minstrelsy.
Okay.
That I know of, right? Anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, so this was a one-off, and this did not start a trend or anything like that. So no one was following Ron's lead on this one. He was kind of all out there on his own. So I can't say that this movie is quote unquote good. How do you evaluate it as
Right.
entertainment? You can't really evaluate this thing as entertainment, although some people online do. They will judge it on whether or not they find the comedy routines funny or whatever. Um, I would say that Yes Sir, Mr. Bones has sort of transcended or left the realm of entertainment in a lot of ways,
Right.
and has become more of a historical artifact.
Kind of a
Uh,
beyond qualitative evaluation at this point.
yes,
More so just critical evaluation is all you can really
yeah,
bring to it.
that's a great way of putting it, because I don't know, in a way, it's very pointless to talk about good and bad when you're talking about a film like, well, there's certain films, that you I can't really judge uh, anymore, or never could. How do you review Triumph of the Will? What do you say? What do you say?
Right.
Um, and this might be considered, that might be considered a wild comparison, but not really if you think of, you know, um, the larger trends that this movie was indicative of. So
Well, how do you reconcile even Al Jolson, right? The jazz
right,
singer, right? There's
oh,
so much that yeah, as the viewpoints changed over time, in I'm confident to say in this case certainly all good ways,
yeah,
necessary ways, but there's a long history. Researching, doing a little research on this, I'm sure Joe found a lot of the same stuff I did.
yeah,
You can find a lot of articles online about all different instances, even again going up to the current
up to
day of
current day of people going
instances
to
of people wearing blackface, um,
costume parties
right?
and
Like, and
Halloween and things
in
like
their
that.
yearbook photos and stuff. Like it's
So
staggering, right?
yeah,
It's sad, but staggering.
so that's why I don't think that Yes Sir, Mr. Bones is maybe ripe for like theatrical exhibition at this point. I don't think it's that is appropriate. I think it's actually sort of more appropriate just to watch it uh, kind of in silence by yourself, just watching it and concentrating
Yeah,
and thinking about it as it plays. I don't think this is a film.
get
I
your
think to play,
friends together with beer and
yeah,
popcorn. It's not that kind of movie, right?
not that kind of thing at all. And I think to play it in front of an audience right now, I don't think that would work, because how do you expect an audience to react? Are they supposed to laugh at the jokes or something? So I would say watch it, but um, every once in a while I will find a film. I will say that the only way to watch it is to just watch it in silence by yourself. I said that about a sort of a torture porn horror film called In a Glass Cage. I said uh, the way to watch that movie is just sitting by yourself, watch it quietly, and think about what is happening in the movie. Now, that film I think is actually an excellent film that I think people should really see, because it's quality. It's very, very shocking, but I think it has some excellent points to make about humanity and cruelty and the past. Um, so, but it's also a film that I think like this that you can't just it's not meant for, and it's not certainly not meant for the mystery science theater treatment. So that makes me
That would be horrific. That would be
that makes me
horrific.
wonder.
Yeah.
Um, of all the Ed Wood films from like the 50s and early 60s, uh, really the only major one that sort of has escaped sort of the mystery science theater realm is Jailbait. I mean, there are various. I mean, Glenn or Glenda has been done by the Mads, Frank Conniff and Trace Ballou. Plan 9 has been done by Riff Tracks. Violent Years and Sinister Urge and Bride of the Monster have all been done by Mystery Science Theater 3000. Uh, Riff Tracks also did like Bride and the Beast. The only one of the major sort of Ed Wood films from his mainstream era that has escaped this is Jailbait. And I think my guess is that it's escaped it because of this scene. I think that there's just no way to do it. because what would you do for that? I guess that the only thing that I would think is that you would just have the sound of people like walking out of the theater, like, no, we can't do, and then they walk out, and then when the scene is over, then they come back. But in deference to Ed Wood, there is one line in this movie that I wanted to point out, said by a white actor. I think his name is William Green, and that I wanted to point out because it seems very Woodian to me. The little boy asks, like, where did all this minstrelsy start? And he said, well, it all started on the Mississippi. To be exact, that's precisely where it did start. And I was like, well, great. That's a great, helpful sentence, guy.
It's not unthinkable, right, that he could have done a little bit of script work during this time frame for somebody like Ron Ormond. He was friends with him to the extent
Well,
they would go out together. And I think surmised once a Square Dance Jubilee that he might have a very brief snippet of a cameo, and it really does look like him.
So that struck me as very Woodian dialogue, and sort of the absent-minded way the guy says it is very much like Herbert Rawlinson's acting in the rest of Jailbait, where of course Herbert was practically he was at death's door basically,
right,
and he was barely making his way through these scenes. So that particular, well, of course, the kids' acting performance, and so the actual acting in Yes Sir, Mr. Bones does have a little bit of a Woodian quality to it. There's some like stiff acting moments, but no, you couldn't really parody it in the way that in that sort of same way that you do with Bride of the Monster or Glen or Glenda or Plan 9. It wouldn't play well in one of those type of.
Conversely, I think this would be a litmus test. If you find this movie genuinely amusing, you're probably a racist.
Well, you should probably seek professional help at that point. You should probably talk to a therapist or something if this movie is genuinely making you crack up. Although I will say that I did chuckle a little bit at George Washing Machine meeting Napoleon with his bones apart. There's a stump speech about the history of politics, the history of history, I guess. He was giving a very inaccurate history about George Washing Machine crossing the Delaware, and what did he find on the other side? Napoleon with his bones apart. Now, these are just, these are joke book jokes. These are Laffy Taffy level jokes, but I had to laugh at George Washing Machine. I'm sorry. I did laugh a little bit at George Washing Machine and Napoleon's with his bones apart. So, but it was probably after like 2 or 3 viewings of Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, and I think my own brain was turning to Laffy Taffy at that point. But otherwise, you will spend, I guarantee, if you are a person who's at all in touch with your conscience or your soul, you'll spend most of this movie just, I guess, in sad silence or angry silence. I don't know what reaction is going to be. It's not going to be mirth.
And I would recommend, if you're going to check it out, and I noticed this actually reading the comments on the YouTube page, many people speculating, it's only going to be a matter of time before somebody complains and this is going to disappear. So catch it while you can. Otherwise, you're going to need to go. I believe the disc is actually out of print. You'll need to go find the disc on Amazon or eBay. It's Showtime Volume 2 from Kip Parker Films, and it's paired up there, curiously enough, with Square Dance Jubilee, another Ron Ormond produced film.
If you're an Ed Wood super completist, you might want to get this film on disc.
It looks great.
So that there is so that you have a hard copy that will not disappear, because as Greg says, this film might well vanish in a puff of smoke, and not without good reason. It will, when it vanishes, if it does vanish, it will vanish with very, very good reason. It'll be totally justified when it vanishes, but still in all, we need to understand, you can't really understand the past without looking at the worst of it. And so watch Yes Sir, Mr. Bones while you can. We've warned you in advance. We got to warn you very much in advance. Go into this with the expectation that you're going to see something horrific, something insulting, something demeaning, something dehumanizing, something that you would never, ever get away with in entertainment today. Know all that before you go into the movie. But I think you will find it not an enjoyable experience. It shouldn't be enjoyable, but worthwhile.
Indeed. Well put, Joe. And with that, I think we can start wrapping things up here. So we hope, obviously, that I don't even want to say necessarily enjoyed this discussion, but I hope you found it.
No,
I hope you found it, edifying in some form or fashion. Um, you mentioned Herbert Rawlinson. I'm glad you did. It's another one in the pile that needs to I need to resurrect as either an article or a podcast, because that is equally, his story is equally as shocking
yeah,
now as
should be
Mr. Bones
as
is.
shocking. Yeah,
Yeah.
his story is as shocking and upsetting in their
And
own.
then sadly, equally as 100 years later, we're referring to a scandal that he had in the late teens, and that came to a head
Yeah,
around 1921. So full 100 years later, it's something that seems to still be commonly happening in Hollywood.
still is happening today. Stories like what's happening there still happening, still in the news as of this week. There was a story that it reminded me of just this week. So
I know what you're referring to, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So
but that's a little teaser. You can probably
little
take a
teaser,
guess.
yes.
You can probably take a guess actually what we're referring to just based on
Yeah.
context of that. But that's not widely spoken of. Just as Mr. Bones is not something where you're going to find a whole ton of trees having been cut down with people writing about it. Same
Nope.
thing with Herbert Rawlinson's early scandals. It's largely forgotten in the mists of time, even when you read little bios about Rawlinson's rather sprawling film career. It's almost never mentioned. But anyway, that's a little preview of something hopefully that'll be coming right around the bend. So I thank you, Joe, for proposing that we do this one, and thank you for joining me and bringing as always, all of your what's the right word for it? Your encyclopedic knowledge of pop culture to the fore, as always. And thanks for really digging deep on all the performers and connecting those dots. So I guess that I'll leave it there. Final thoughts, final words, Joe?
Just that I am glad, I guess it's a weird word to use, but glad that I finally sat down and watched this. And I would just recommend people be strong, get through it. I don't think that this is normal. Don't think that this is admirable, but watch it anyway. Indeed. For context.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us here today. We'll be back certainly. Ed Wood Wednesdays, more to come. Most certainly coming up on its 10th anniversary, Joe. Is that right?
Yeah. We just passed 9, so 9th, I think so. 10's coming up.
The most certainly an encyclopedic, I'll use that word again, encyclopedic body of work out there about Ed Wood, without a doubt, the Ed Wood Wednesdays portion of Joe's Dead to Rights blog. So you should probably, if you're watching this, you're more than likely very much aware of that. And I've had the privilege of writing quite a bit there over the years, thanks to Joe. And we'll be back, certainly. Joe and I will be back here at the Ed Wood Summit podcast. I'll be back with some others along the way as well. And until then, I hope you all have an enjoyable time. And as always, I hope you found this beneficial. Thanks. Bye.